you hear me? Black is beautiful. Santa Claus. Black is beautiful. It's a texture. Lift your head like me. You got to wear it forward with dignity. How it burn out. Black is beautiful. I said, sing it along. Black is beautiful. Say, I'm black and proud. It's high time that we get rid of that old slave mentality. If you hear me, black is beautiful. Santa Claus. Black is beautiful. It's a texture. Lift your head like me. You got to wear it forward with dignity. How it burn out. Black is beautiful. I said, sing it along. Black is beautiful. Say, I'm black and proud. It's high time that we get rid of that old slave mentality.
And a very good evening to you with the sound and the words of the mighty Duke, Kelvin Pope, born 1932, died in 2009. I regard him as one of the foremost voices of Black liberation in our Caribbean. He has the distinction of ringing the Calypso crown in Trinidad and Tobago 4 successive years, 1968, 1969, 1970, and 1971. They brought back Sparrow and Kitchener in 1972 to dethrone him. But is immortal Calypso, Black is Beautiful, the anthem of the Black Power movement, capturing it in song. And we use that as our theme song here on Black Matters. Welcome to Politics 101, Black Matters edition on a Friday evening. We started, of course, last week, and we had quite an introduction. Dion Abrams and Pastor London opened for us last week. And on this program, of course, we will be dealing strictly with matters that have to do with African Guyanese and Black people all over the world. We, of course, this is Black History Month. Black History Month. It is Black History Month. As you know, Black History Month started in the United States as Negro History Month, and it has evolved into Black History Month. Is now recognized in the United States and in Canada, and of course in the United Kingdom, there Black History Month is in October. And for us in Guyana, it is in many regards, our Black History Month. It is the month of the Coffee Revolution, the 1763 Revolution, the month of our Mashramani, our version of Carnival. So in many respects, it's African Heritage Month in Guyana. It is not being enshrined. Of course, we also celebrate August as Emancipation Month. So it's a good time to start our examination of our own condition as African Guyanese and to bring to the fore our issues, to bring to the fore our condition, and to bring to the fore our reaction to our condition and the condition of Guyana. My guest tonight is going to be Tacuma Ogunseye. You can tell from his name what he's about. He was a member of ASCREA, the African Society for Cultural Relations with Independent Africa, that was founded in 1964 and headed by Brother Ayusi Kwayana, who we are going to get to come on. Brother Ayusi, still around, as you know, is going to be 98 years in a couple of months, but he's still around, still around. I spoke to him this past week, and we've got to get him on. But Brother Tacuma Ogunseye was a member of ASCREA, and ASCREA became a founding member of the Working People's Alliance. And then ACDA came into being in 1993. And Brother Tacuma Ogunseye was a founding member of ACDA. He's still an ACDA member. So he's best placed to talk about the African condition and the historical development of the African presence in Guyana. So please share the link and let others know that Black Matters is on tonight. Black Matters is on tonight, and we are going to spend the hour really getting our teeth into the matters that affect African Guyanese here. Welcome to you if you're joining us from Guyana. Of course, it's a Friday evening. It's the end of the work week for most people, for the public servants and others. And we say, thank God it's Friday. Thank God it's Friday. And you're tuning in to Black Matters. Good evening to all of you who are joining us from Guyana, wherever you're joining from, whether it's from the Essequibo Coast, or you're somewhere in the hinterland, or you're there in the heart in Demerara, Georgetown, East Bank, the East Coast, the West Coast, the West Bank. Those of you who are joining us from Quarantine, West Bobis. Good evening, Belladrum, El Dorado. Good evening, number 5. Good evening to you in number 28. Good evening to you if you're in Litchfield. Good evening to you if you're in Weldad. Welcome to Politics 101, the Friday night edition, Black Matters. Black Matters. And who would think that in 2023, we will be talking about Black Matters. Good evening, Orrin Newton. I haven't seen you for a little while. There are outstanding matters that we have to deal with, but we'll deal with that off air. John McDonald, June, of course, is our in-house historian. We were talking last night about the tremendous artistic quality that has come out of our Caribbean. And June remembers Carifesta way back in 1972. We just did 50 years of Carifesta. First Carifesta, the Caribbean Festival of Creative Arts, which inaugurated in Guyana in 1972. Good evening, June Cameron. Janice's Booker. Good evening. Good evening to you, Roderick Henry, Carletta Reynolds, Edel Rodney. Good evening to you, Denise Collison. Welcome to Black Matters. Tonight we are going to turn up the heat. Last week we got off to quite a start. Good evening to you. Welcome to Black Matters. June says she's watching from Brooklyn. To all those of you in Brooklyn, good evening, Lynette. Lynette Zephyr, my sister. Belgium in the house. Carletta Reynolds, Belgium El Dorado. I had the pleasure of spending Emancipation Day there and witness the cultural presentation there on Emancipation Day, and got a chance to walk about the village for a little while. I was there with Brother Lincoln and Brother Leland Saul, who himself is from Belgium. And I remember as a little young boy going up to Belladrum, El Dorado to dance kwekwe. We had a kwekwe group in Buxton called Tutashinda, headed by Brother Kwame Apata. And we would roll into Kwame Little Mini Minor. So many of us would roll into that, and we would go every Friday night. We were gone somewhere to dance kwekwe, and Belladrum was one of the places that we went very frequently. And there was an old joke because we never always knew exactly where we are going to, the address. And our brother Nkofi, one of the leaders of the group, used to say, well, look, when we get into the village, we're going to drive, and where you see a lot of dogs line up, you will know that is where the kwekwe is. Because, of course, they cook enough food, and where food is, the dogs would always be there. And invariably, we would find where the kwekwe is. Good evening. Good evening to all of you. I notice Sister Nima Flu-Bess, the hardworking parliamentarian from the East Bank. Of course, she's from Mocha. Welcome to you, sister. We haven't had an update on Mocha, because I understand you're still doing stuff in there, and we've got to get you on as quickly as possible to give us an update on Mocha. Good evening, Vibert White from East Bank, also up there in Grove. Welcome to Politics 101. Gladwin Bruce, good evening, is coming to us from Florida. Good evening, Florida. Good evening, Atlanta. Good evening, North Carolina and South Carolina. Good evening, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Maryland. Good evening to those of you who are coming to us from Chicago. And of course, good evening to Arizona, where I spend some of my time. Oswin King, my brother from Arizona, is on tonight. And Oswin said he's originally from Belladrum. Listen, people will say, I'm sure a lot of people know Oswin from Linden. And I always say, Linden is really West Bobby's and to some extent East Coast, because a lot of the families in Linden originated from West Bobby's and the East Coast of Demerara. I lived, I think, for a year as a child in Linden. My aunt used to go up to Linden to sell. She would take fruits and other things from Georgetown with RH car. We used to say RH car. And I remember we lived in Valley of Tears. I always ask when I go to Linden, or always at Linden, about Valley of Tears. I was a child. I think I was about 4 or 5. But what I remember is that there was a creek in Valley of Tears, and the water was the coldest water I have ever experienced in Guyana. Welcome to Politics 101. Linden, of course, Walter Rodney referred to it as the cradle of the working class revolution. And it's one of the communities that has been targeted by the PPP for crushing of the spirit. Because in my humble estimation, that's what they're trying to do, to crush the spirit of African Guyanese. Please share the link. Please do share the link. Welcome to Politics 101, Simone Blackman. Welcome to Politics 101. Welcome, Sheila George. Welcome to Black Matters Tonight. Tonight's edition of Politics 101, Black Matters. We are now spreading out. We are coming to, 5 nights per week. We have our Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And of course, we have now added Friday night, where we are doing Black Matters. And on Monday night, I am a party man and I don't mix party into the regular thing. But on Monday night, we'll be doing WPA groundings. WPA groundings, where we will speak strictly about WPA's party politics as we seek to get ourselves out into the communities. We know we have been in the struggle, and now we are about to go into the communities. Every Monday night, you can have WPA groundings. Those of you who are on Channel 9 would know there is Walter Rodney groundings. And we'll be here on Monday night to give the WPA's perspective. That's coming up this coming Monday. But tonight is Black Matters. Where are we as a Black people in Guyana? What are the challenges we have to face in Guyana every day? Are we making too much as a Black people about our condition? What about those who are telling us why it has to be about race? Oh, David Hinds, before you open your mouth, everything is about race. Why are they trying to get us not to talk about Black issues? What happened in Mocha? Did it have something to do with the racial origins of the people in Mocha? Yes, maybe it had something to do with the fact that they're poor. We don't deny that. Yes, it may have something to do because they're there on the East Bank. We don't deny that. But in our class system in Guyana, race is very much part of it. As I said last night, the Indian working class is not competing with the Indian rich for resources or the Black rich. The Indian working class is competing for resources with the Black working class and the Amerindian working class. And insofar as they are concerned politically, the Indian working class identifies more with the Indian rich and the Indian elite than with their Indian working class counterpart. That's the reality. And that the PPP is saying to the Indian working class, you may be poor. You may not get very much from the budget, but we are spending on sugar. We're opening workshops in your communities. We are building stadiums in your communities. The gas shore pipeline is going to go through your communities. The harbor bridge is going to start and end in your community. You may be poor. You may not be getting as much as the rich Indian, but we are giving you more than the poor Black and the poor Amerindian. The way in which race is folded into us. So those who remind me that I come out of the Marxist tradition and that I should go back to the Marxist tradition as if I ever left. Because the thing is Black Marxism, meaning how does the Black condition fit in to Marxist thought and action? Karl Marx said that class is the defining thing in society, the class struggle. And of course, I do subscribe, I do embrace that theory. But Marx never studied Guyana. Marx never studied ethnically divided societies. And so therefore the task for those of us who study and live in ethnically divided societies and are Marxists is to figure out how to use Marxist analysis to explain our condition, but to understand the limitations of Marxist analysis in explaining our situation. That Marxist analysis goes to a certain point. It explains the class dimensions in our society, but it doesn't equip us to deal with the racial dimensions of our society. And so therefore, we have to contribute a racial analysis to Marxism. And that is what Black Marxists such as C.L.R. James and Walter Rodney and others from the Caribbean have done. And so we are not going to be turned around into people getting us to talk about class when they're practicing race. That's what they want us to do. We must talk about Marxist analysis and class and so on while they are practicing racism. Racists don't like people to talk about racism. They want you to be silent on racism. You know, the thief man come to the passenger side of your car, you get your handbag with your little money in there, and the thief man come up and say, "Hi, Johnny, what's happening? Look, they're selling things cheap over there. And since you turn your eye, they're gone with your bag." That's how racists operate. They want to change the conversation to suit them. You see, when they were in opposition, they were talking race all the time. I know that the APNU did not close down the estates because of race. I know that I was close to them. In fact, my own position is that thing went bad for them because they didn't take into consideration race. I think it was a non-racial act on their part in trying to right-size sugar. You can't be producing sugar at 40 cents per pound and selling it for 8 cents per pound. That is crazy. But the fact of the matter is that the majority of sugar workers are East Indians. And if you're going to make a big jump, you have to take into consideration what the racial implications would be. And they didn't. And the PPP labeled it as a racist act. They said to Indians, they're trying to kill all you off. But now they are in power. And we said, you're giving another category of workers 8% while you're splurging money on gaisuku, on sugar. You're splurging money on infrastructure where Indian and Portuguese, maybe Portuguese contractors are. And we saying, when you're doing that, you're trying to kill off Black people. They tell David Hines and the WA introducing race. You see the double standards. And so we insist on engaging the race issue in order to solve the race issue. We're not engaging it, as they say, to push racism. Oh no. Welcome to Politics 101. Good evening to all of you. We're going to be talking Black Matters tonight. It's about time that I bring in my guests. Good evening, Brother Tacuma.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. I want to join you in expressing wishes to the African community, both in Guyana, the Caribbean, and diaspora. Happy Black History Month. And I hope that we could make the best out of the month in discussing our situation. And it's good to join you tonight to discuss the conditions of African people in Guyana.
Brother Tacuma, you, of course, our audience knows you, and you have been a participant in the Black struggle. You know, as Black people, we have to be participant in the Black struggle. We have to be participant in the national struggle. We have to be participant in the working class struggle because we are located in all those areas. But tonight, we want to talk to you about the Black struggle. As you peruse the state of African Guyanese from independence in 1966 to the present, how would you characterize the Black condition today, 56 years, 57 years after independence? Give us an overview of where you think the Black, the race, the ethnic group is in Guyana.
I think that this is not only my personal judgment. I think what I will be saying will represent a kind of collective consensus in the African community, both at the level of the rank and file members, both at the level of our leadership in ethnic organizations. I think it is reasonable and just to say that the African condition overall have never been as bad as it is since independence. And I think that we are faced with an unprecedented crisis. And the crisis is not only political, it is economic, it is social, it is cultural. It's all embracing. And I think that we have arrived at a point where there have to be a hard look at how Africans engage in this project, Guyana. I think that unfortunately, the last elections and the way in which power was removed from the party that the African people support, the coalition, and the way in which the PPP returned to power, and the fact that our leadership at the highest levels let us down in terms of not standing up and fight in the face of a controversial elections where the PPP engaged all in rigging. And at minimum, the African political leadership should have held its ground and insist for some resolution based upon some sharing of power. And they should have never, in the context of that situation, concede power to the PPP. I think that demoralized the African community in a major way. And the way in which the PPP dealt with the community, they engaged in a form of collective punishment, where they quickly began to witch hunt, dismiss Africans from areas of employment, put a lot of African leaders before the court on all kinds of charges, and they create clearly an atmosphere of not only political defeat for Africans, but the atmosphere of political repression. And then by the time they settled into government and they began to unfold the budgets, it became very clear that they were continuing the process that they had started in 1992 and that went on until they were defeated, so for 2 years, they have engaged in a policy that impoverished the African community. And they quickly began that process. Now, all of this, okay, is taking place in the context of oil and gas, which anybody who looking at Guyana at present and trying to picture what Guyana is going to be a few years from now, and where would be what would be the African standing or condition going forward in Guyana, must be extremely alarmed, because at present we don't control 10% of the economy. So we're after so many years of independence, our standing in the economy have not significantly increased. It got worse. And with oil and gas and the transformative effect that will have, regardless of which government in power, because the economic dynamics of oil and the interplay of those resources on other sections of the economy would bring to Guyana tremendous investments from many areas of the world.
Tacuma, if I may stop you there, because you're going very fast, and we want to take this thing. Now, you said that in your perusal of almost 7 decades of independence, this is the worst for Africa. That's one. Two, you said that the last election was a critical moment for the condition of African Guyanese, and that the way in which the election played out, where there was evidence, of rigging by the PPP. The PPP itself made accusations of rigging against the coalition. So at best, we can say that the elections were controversial, as you said. The Americans said it was disputed, and so forth. But you also went on to say that our leaders maybe did not read the situation correctly. Yeah, and I want to put this question directly to you. Do you believe that the missing link in their analysis of the 2020 moment was that they did not take enough into consideration what would have been the racial consequences of that election? Do you think that was a critical error on the part of the formal political leadership?
Yes, but I think it's more than that.
Yes, I know it's more than that, but I want you to speak to that aspect of it.
Yeah, because anybody who lived through Guyana and who lived through the PP rule from '92, when one would have expected that the democratic dividend that we fought for as a nation, which was won not simply by PPP efforts alone, but by WP in a major way, they decide to squander that, and they decide to go on a deliberate policy of racial and ethnic, political, economic consolidation, and they had no bones about it. So our leadership must have to be aware that if in the context of those controversial elections, they surrender to the PPP, that the PPP would use its return to power to continue what it was doing in 23 years, and even worse than that, because given the crisis of the elections, the PPP made it very clear its attitude not only to the African community, but to the PNC and the APMU and the coalition people, that once they get into power, they're going to drive you into the sun. And I think that the African community became the victim of that, because the African community is the political backbone of the coalition. So Comrade Granger and company ought to have bear that foremost in mind. And, you know, I don't want to be too personal, because even before the results of the elections were settled, on Walter Rodney groundings, myself and Brother Dion Abrams, on many programs, we argue an approach for the coalition. We point out the jeopardies and the racial and political problems involved, and we argue for a solution based upon some form of sharing of government, if it's 2 or 3 years, then we go back to the elections. I make this point to say it was very much in the political mix, and we made the ethnic point. So they knew. That's why I'm saying it is more than that. You know? Hello? Am I with you? Hello? Like we lost one.
You're on. I was off. I'm making the point that your point is well taken. We don't want to be splitting hairs. We agree that it was an error not to take the racial consequences into consideration when the decisions were being taken in the 5 months, because we have seen in the last 3 years that the major target for PPP's repression has been Black people. Not the only target; they target poor people. You know, they've targeted various sections, but the major target has been Black people. You can't look at Linden. You can't look at Moko. You can't look at the vendors in front of the stalls there, in front of the hospital. You can't look at the pittance they give to the public servants. You can't look at spitting in the face of a young woman, kneeling on the back of a young woman, locking up a young lawyer. You can't look at all those things and don't see racial pattern. I think people usually ask for evidence and they want you to tell them 50% and 30%. But I'm saying, look at those scenarios in front of your face and look at which racial group is at the receiving end. And on that score, Brother Tacuma, let me move you to something you wrote about recently in what I consider to be a brilliant analysis of that development. What took place in Boston a couple of weeks ago. And I want you to zero in on that, because everybody by now knows that the gentlemen were known to be friends of the PPP, but that here were friends of the PPP being pursued by members of the state apparatus. What is the dynamic that is playing out there?
As I said in the letter, it is no secret, because Ali went to Buxton, he identified with those elements, you know, and they had photographs. He threatened you in their company, you know. He made it very clear that the PPP is demonstrating that they have political standing in Buxton. They have the enforcers. So there is no doubt. As I made a point in 2002, the PPP had people in the village. I'm not going to spend not much time on that, but a lot of persons didn't know that the PPP had people in the village. But this time, you don't have to fight the battle, because Ali made it very clear, you know, that he got his people in there. And as you said quite correctly, okay, can you pursue one of their people on suspicion of having drugs? But you and I know Guyana. People with political connections. and the level of connections those elements in Buxton got at the highest levels of government, the president, the person who controlled that operation have phone access to the president on a day-to-day basis. And I know Guyana good enough that one phone call could have sorted that matter out. One phone call. And Kanu and the police stepped down on these matters because the persons are involved are connected with those in power. The fact that that didn't happen, you had to dive deeper into trying to understand what is at play. You understand what is at play. And then you begin to hear things coming out of the community, you know. And it became clear that there has been a rupture or a perceived rupture between the PPP and those elements. And one of the big issues is, in my judgment, because run-ins is a major part of that relationship, and the boys know that PPP runners have uninterrupted access. The Kanu and the police don't pursue them, and if by chance they pursue them with a phone call, Kanu or the police will stand down. And as I said in the letter, my own sense was that the fellows felt that they were subject to racial victimization, that the PPP is applying double standards. They allow Indian elements to move billions of Guyana dollars worth in drugs. And as the boys on the ground, both in Buxton and in Georgetown, is saying that there's just a small thing, man, the 7 grand Guyana is no big thing. And why they're stopping it. And I think the race element cannot be ruled out, because the persons who are the victims are saying race is a factor involved in it, that they felt victimized. So the whole, even though they're in some form of an alliance with the PPP, they're not immune from the PPP assault, racial assault on African Guyanese. And it seems to have no bounds, no boundaries, you know. The other aspect of it is that the PPP is continuing where it left off in the 2002-05, coming up to that whole crisis on the East Coast, of using the state to suppress African people, then using African people to engage in acts of violence and oppression against themselves. And we have to be careful, the village have to be careful, and the African community have to be careful. We have to learn the lessons of that earlier crisis. And we have to be careful. And see, my concern in those period was that extrajudicial killing had become a major concern for the African community. Every day you open the papers, you see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 black youths get killed. And I remember the oppressive feelings of the community, where people are crying out, when this thing gonna stop? I remember in Agda, we wrote the president, we engaged in demonstrations. I know Corbyn and the PNC do things, but nothing, you know, happened to stop it. And I was concerned that the African political and cultural leadership was not investing in enough to stop it. And I was concerned that the elements who are the victims, which is a normal human thing, if the police shooting at me, eventually if nobody come to me assistance, I got to defend myself. I got to fight for my own survival. And I was concerned that they would eventually fight back, and they began to fight back. The concern and the point I'm trying to make politically is that we allow a clear political act by the state which we should have responded with everything we had to stop it. We allowed the victims, okay, to try to deal with it, and it went haywire. And I'm concerned right now, the level of oppression in the African community is just make me remember the feelings in the extrajudicial period, where Africans really today is feeling that, look, our situation in this place under PPP is hopeless, and something have to happen. And I'm saying that we have, as African leaders, we have to develop a response, and a quick response. And we have to put everything we have and throw it at the PPP. I don't know we could approach this thing in the normal way based upon elections and things. And what the point I'm trying to make, that our situation is so desperate that we need a solution very quickly. Very, very quickly. And the African political leadership, I hope, wouldn't make the same mistake that they made in the early 2020 in dealing with the PPP and assaulting us. You know, so those few words should tell you how serious I consider our situation.
Yes, and of course, as you have pointed out in relation to Buxton, that even among those who are supposedly friends with the PPP, that there is no level playing field for them. There's no level playing field for them. And it's a lesson to those who accept the approach that you can play games with political leadership and believe you can outsmart them. And at the end of the day, they have state force. And I think the experience of 2002, the experience now shows that that game of believing that you can, go and engage the PPP and outsmart them, it's always a risky approach, because as we have seen, that when it suits them, they will lose the state on you. It should not be lost on us that maybe the PPP leadership did tell Kanu, you go after them, and then we will clean it up afterwards. But they may not have bargained for the kind of response that they got from the young men there in the village. And I think, as you said, it's a dangerous situation. I want to point your attention to something. You know, I was told that you thought the foreign minister went into Kansas City in Linden and walking around with Linden people behind him, trying to say, I come here to bring development to you. Now, this man is the foreign minister. One would imagine that he would be looking after issues that have to do with Venezuela and the border and foreign policy. But here they get him like a little short-tailed boy going in to Kansas City to hoodwink black people. He's willingly doing it. It means he's foreign minister in name only, but really what his real job for the PPP is to be their baggage boy, to go in the black community and fool black people. Your comments?
I think you're quite right. There is a very undignified relationship between the African elements who joined the PPP. You know, it's a very undignified. I don't have no problem politically with people from different ethnic groups, Indians joining the PNC or the APMU, and Africans joining the PPP. In principle, I have no problems with that. But the test is what you're joining for and the way in which you're being used. And I don't think no African person, having experienced the 23 years, or the 22 years or 23 years of the PPP from 92 to 2015, could tell me in any good conscience that joining the PPP, okay, open up any real possibilities for advancement of African interests. The Africans who join the PPP, they join the PPP conscious, okay, that they're promoting their self-interest, and they join conscious that they're prepared to allow themselves to be used, okay, to oppress African people. And that is exactly what the PP is using them to do. Now, the so-called campaign that the PPP is on, well, not so-called campaign, is a so-called claim to be making to success. They have a campaign by the president entering African communities, handing out pittance and promises, and then using that for political and partisan purposes. Now, in politics, one can't argue with a president going to a community to discuss governmental policies and developmental issues if it is done properly and not in a partisan way. When the president goes to a community as a president, or a minister, the government goes to a community as a minister, they don't go there, okay, as a party hack. They go there as a member of a government who is in charge of handling taxpayers' money, all of us monies. And when they propose, or when they seek to work out social, economic, and developmental issues, it's not patronage from the party to the people. It's them, they're supposed to be going there to account for the stewardship of the national funds, and go there to hear people's concerns so that they could fashion the right priorities in terms of projects, okay, and policies to address persons' condition. But the PPP is entering African communities in order to use the state, okay, to force African people to engage in an undignified political compromise. They're forcing us to sell our souls. And they're making it clear that we have to eat at the table of the PPP. That those funds that the state got, you really ain't supposed to have it. You're not an equal citizen. Those are not your funds collectively. Those are our funds. And we come to you now to strike a deal with you, sell your soul, and we give you pittance, or stay unpunished. And that is the height of racism and apartheid policy. You know, they have, in this country, the people have developed an economic policy of different development for the African community, that is different development for the Indian community. And not by accident, by deliberate policy. And I will argue it is part of the apartheid mentality of the government. And it's part of the racist, you know, policy of the regime.
Are you with us, Brother OG?
Yes, yes. Yeah,
yes.
I'll give you a chance to come in.
Let us get back to an issue that you introduced, and that is the issue of oil. Because the coming of oil wealth has changed the politics and society in Guyana. There is no ifs and buts about that. We are now into the era of post-oil, and we have to characterize everything that happened before as before oil or pre-oil. And I want you to explain to us the racial dynamics of post-oil. We've talked, and we know that there are other people who are analyzing the coming of oil from the standpoint of Guyana versus the big oil companies. So there's that analysis going on. But we want to talk here about how has the coming of oil affected the racial dynamics of Guyana? Over to you.
Now, everybody knows Everybody know that Guyana society, even before oil, we were the victims of King Sugar, and we were victims of colonialism, and the colonial economy and the colonial masters structured the economy unevenly. They had a racial lens. And at the end of colonialism, quote unquote, at independence, we came out of that in a certain condition. And if you watch all the indicators in the colonial, when we at the end of early independence, Africans were dominant in the public sector, dominant in the army, in the police, teachers, trade, in trades. And in every area that Africans had a dominance. Check it today. Those with the exception, of the army. Every other area we have been under serious challenge. And I want to be clear, I don't have no problem with other ethnic groups entering into space that was historically African. But if the consequences of that is not the African people are able to enter space that the other people have, or a new space in the economy is created for Africans, then the logic of that engagement is what we have today, where every area that Africa have dominance, that Indians didn't have dominance at the end of independence, they challenge you in every area. And we don't challenge them where it matters in agriculture, business, and so forth. So we're not putting any pressure on their key economic indicators, but they are putting tremendous pressure on our economic indicators. No, I don't want to blame them for it, but I'm just saying that is the way it evolved. So we are at a point where nobody will deny that Africans only got 10% of the economy. And oil enter the equation at this point. Now, oil could do two things for Guyana. If we handle it properly, it could resolve a lot of the economic disparities that we developed out of the colonial state. And we can narrow the gap between the ethnic groups, the African and Indians, the Amerindians and the African and Indians, by engaging with economic policies that seek to do that in order to harmonize the country so that we give real meaning to independence. And we also create the atmosphere politically, economically, and socially for Guyanese cohesion and defense of the national resources of the country. So oil could do that for us, and it could do it very quickly. So we don't have to fight in the old way with the scarcity of resources. We are in a situation where we could anticipate bounty. We have so much money now with only 2 wells working. We have discovered over 32 wells. Imagine when 10 wells working. We can't even count the money. So I'm saying that this resource could do 2 things: either widen the economic gap between the Africans and the Indians, and the Amerindians and the Indians, or we could use it wisely to narrow the gap. And I'm saying the PPP policy is clear. They're not interested in using oil to narrow the gaps. They're interested to use oil to expand the gaps and to consolidate Indian domination. So oil brings into the equation urgency for the African and the Amerindians and others to readdress the social contract that we struck in independence. It can't work anymore. We have to have a new social contract where all of us sit at the table and all of us deal with this resource. Because if we don't do that, it's going to lead to racial bloodshed. We see in countries like Africa, where is the same race group, but only different ethnicity. Some might be, Yoruba, some might be another tribe and so. But the same race. And over oil resources, they slaughter one another. And I don't know who believe that Guyana and Guyanese are so different to other human beings. And more so, we have not prepared the young generation to deal with the race problem, the political problem, and to deal with oil, and to deal with negotiating, the dynamics of international business and so. So we are a country that are going to be easily manipulated, and we're going to quickly be shooting at one another. And I think we have a very small, area to salvage this thing, or we're going to go down the road where none of us, right senses will want us to go. And the tragic thing about this is that the PPP is insensitive to these national challenges, not simply ethnic challenges, also national challenge. Because if we don't fix it, eventually, the so-called economic dominance that Indians have, the white people are going to erase that in 20 years quickly and change all how the Chinese change the commerce, the Indian commerce in this city. So, Indian leaders, got to be, more far-sighted. And that is the tragedy of Guyana, the tragedy of the PPP, is that they haven't produced leadership, that could see beyond the narrow and beyond the partisan. No sense of love for nation, no real sense of love for their own people. They don't love the Indian people, because if they love the Indian people, they wouldn't set up a scenario that inevitably would lead to Indian destruction and national destruction. So for me, oil is a game changer, and we don't have a lot of time. And I think the Americans have warned us. They know that they have played a political role in shaping Guyana, and I sense that their conscience is biting them, and they decide to say to us, look, you all better share this thing in the context of this oil, or else I know you are going to fight. And we're willing to help all you and support it. So they want to correct the historical wrong. They gave you a chance. We can support it. But our leaders on both sides is not biting. I don't understand. If I was the opposition leader, I would have started a stampede for shared governance, constitutional reform and shared governance, and force the Americans to either be treacherous or to come good, and use their power for us to resolve this problem. So we are on our side in the context of oil, and this oil going to quickly, worsen the economic division, situation between the races. And if the African community give the PPP another 5 years with oil, I am not certain that we're going to be able to correct the economic imbalances, because what's going to happen, they will be tying up a lot of economic business with Chinese, with Indians, Americans, British. A whole set of foreign interests will coincide with the local economic interests of Indians and create a much more difficult situation for Africans. And I think that the African leadership and the African masses has to make up its mind whether we're going to enter another win and take all elections where we're likely to lose. And even if we win, if we don't have significant economic power, it doesn't matter. And I'm saying that the African economic and social condition is so bad that it requires a total rethink. I said on, I think it was in Walter, I did programs last Sunday. We need to take our people out of the armies, the police, and all of those areas where we don't create generational wealth. We don't, when you any army pass on nothing to the children. And we need to get into business and situate ourselves in areas of the economy that will grow given the new dynamics. And we have to free African energies for them security work, African women watching people store and left the children in the house unattended. All of those things are tied up with this equation. And I'm saying that we reach at a transformative point for African politics, economics, and social approach to survival in Guyana. We have to do it radically different. And time is not on our side. A lot of things that we come out of independence with some comfort, and we think it used to work in our interests. At one time, we had a large army with how much 1,000 soldiers? Today, how much? Oh, if you got 5,000 soldiers, we got plenty. I think you got 3,000 soldiers. So even in economic sense, it doesn't give you any significant income. And every area we find ourselves are the low-paid areas, and more worse than all, it doesn't allow you to build generational wealth. So, in a nutshell, I'm saying, given our condition and given what oil is going to do, we don't know ifs and buts about it. Oil is going to transform the country. And you don't, in fact, in Guyana now, you don't even have to discuss budget. The amount of money that any government will have, you don't even need no discussion about it. Once you begin to spend them kind of money, you must get some amount of development. So there's a new paradigm in the equation. And the quicker the African community, the political, economic, and cultural leadership make a U-turn, it is better for us and it's going to be better for Guyana. Because I am convinced resolving the ethnic problems between African Indians and the Amerindian issue, where you could have the possibility of really uniting the country and giving meaning to independence and put us in a better place to stand up to the economic vultures who will descend upon the country as we move forward. So for me, addressing the African issue, the race issue, is also addressing the national issue. But since I can't tell Indians how to act, I have to spend my time telling the African leadership and the African masses how to act. And sooner or later, I've reached a point. I mean, they're on long enough. And if this got to be my last fight, I'm going to fight it. I'm going to tell African people at the appropriate time what we got to do. And we got to go outside there and do it.
And that question that you just ended there with is where I was going next. What are we doing right as the African community, as activists in the community? What are we doing right? Because there is a sense of despondency that our formal political leaders in the political party, they aren't defending us, they aren't representing us. We saw the situation in Mocha. We did not even stage some minimal protest action. There are those who may criticize some of us on social media for going too far. Of course, our brother Ravi Dev said that while Norton in Parliament did not mention race, that his friends in the WPA are pushing him in that direction. What are we doing right? Are we doing anything right in the last 3 years? Or have we in the last 3 years been a total failure?
Now, and I'm assuming you mean we, the African community.
Yes,
right,
the African community, yes.
Okay, I think, look, there's a simple test. When you're in a battle and you're doing things and the enemy is not taking any heed of you, you're doing wrong. It's ineffective. But when what you're doing, the enemy is forced to engage you, you're on the right track. And if nothing else, the African elements who evolve yourself, Duncan, Ben Scott, Burke, Kodaki, a lesser extent, Dion and myself, because we're not working so much on Facebook, but we're on Walter Rodney groundings. I think that activity is what keeps the African soul together and open up a sense that all is not lost and that something, some work is being done. And I think the PPP is conscious of it, because I think the PPP came to a position that given the fact that they came to power with American support and the fact that they came to power with the PNC divided, that they're in a position to crush the PNC and by extension, crush the African people and the African spirit. And I think that the problem that they faced with, that the social media create an effective counterbalance, because remember, they control the most of the conventional media in the country. The PPP and the Indian domination in those media is undisputable. And even when they're not acting deliberately, in the interest of the PPP, they act in the self-interest. And as a consequence of that, the actions, have racial implications. And I think that the social media outlets had opened up to us and to the African community a pathway of hope. And I think it's very important and very effective. And I think that is why they are engaging you comrades on those media. They can't ignore you, because you're doing for the community what the PNC by itself couldn't do. And the PPP knows that you all have been able to keep up the spirit of resistance alive in the African community. So I think that is important in probably the most important political action post election crisis.
Brother Tacuma Ogunseye there, holding out some hope for us in the Black community. We have had quite a discussion here tonight, and touching on some issues that have to do with Black people. Brother Ogunseye, you did say that at some point you will address, I suppose you will address as an individual and as part of your own party, and whatever organizations that you belong to, how we should move in the African Guyanese community. But while we await that, how should we be moving now without getting into any deep plans and secret boots on the ground and all those kinds of things? What should we be doing right now?
Okay, and this is no secret. This is why I call open politics. I think that the PPP is telling the nation and the world that they have been making massive inroads into the African community, and they're trying to suggest that African people are getting comfortable, if not already comfortable, with the PPP rule, and that there's mischief makers who are just creating problems. Now, you and I know different, but that is the political narrative that they're spinning in the country, the region, and the world. And we have to answer that. And the way you answer that by political mobilization. You have to have demonstrations in the African community. And I'm saying the African community as distinct from wider Guyana. I am willing to concede that at this point, we should avoid demonstrations in the commercial centers. At Georgetown and so in the hearty commercial centers, to avoid giving PPP a chance to infiltrate and to create mischief and so. But the African community have to give a political demonstration where they stand and that they're not bulbused by the PPP antics. So that is the first major thing that we have to do. We have to have a series of uprising. And by uprising, I mean political uprising, massive demonstrations, public meetings, resolution passing on all the issues in African, exclusively African community, not multiracial community. This is an African response to an African challenge. And I think that nothing short of that is wrong one. There's wrong one. And it's going to solve a lot of the problems in wrong two. Because as we begin to mobilize our people, and people begin to again feel their collective strength, it will only get stronger. But it will knock, the lie that Africans are gullible, they're easy fooled, and that the PPP is making rings around them, and they're willing to enter into the PPP playbook. We have to show in concrete political terms that that is not so. The way to do it, in my judgment, is a set of enhanced political action in exclusively African communities. So nobody could doubt who involved here. This is an African response.
Thank you very much, Brother Tacuma Ogunseye. You couldn't ask for a better way to close out tonight's program of Black Matters. As you would have noticed, we dealt exclusively with matters that have to do with the African Guyanese community. And we have to engage this struggle at all levels. We have to engage the struggle as Africans. We have to engage the struggle as opposition, the opposition. We have to engage the struggle as Guyanese. We have to engage the struggle as working class people, because all are involved, as Martha Carter said, all are consumed. And so those who want to push us into particular corners, we are not going to be pushed into particular corners. We constantly having to move. But on Friday nights, we want to talk about how, as Black people, we would move. I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. I want to thank those of you who continue to support these programs. As we said, we are expanding. We have expanded now to Friday night. And come Monday, we're going to be doing a Monday edition of Politics 101. So we have gone to 5 nights a week. It takes some doing, takes some organizing. I want to thank all those of you who come out here each night in your numbers and keep company with us. Those of you who have gone beyond that and have tried to help in material ways, I want to thank you. Those who help in small ways, those who help in medium ways, we want to thank you, because we are in this thing together. We come here in peace as usual. We did our thing in peace. We bring, as the old people used to say, we bring learning, we bring education, we bring teaching, we bring information, we bring analysis, but most of all, we bring love and we bring mobilization, because we're not doing this as an end in itself. There is an objective, and the objective is that we want to live as free people, free human beings in a country that we have sacrificed beyond our numbers for. We want to live as free people. We want all of Guyana to live as free people. But if one group lives unfree, then no group is free. Brother Ogunseye, the last words.
I'm convinced that we have, as a people, we have crushed slavery and colonialism. We're going to defeat the PPP. I have no doubt about that. But the question that worries me is that I, as a political person, I know the longer you take to get a force like the PPP off your back, the harder it will become. You're going to eventually defeat them. But the price you will have to pay going to be larger, and if you give them too much time. And I really think that the African community and its leadership, both political, religious, cultural, has to resolve that make this thing less painful for everybody. We and the entire nation. And I think it's better we start it now, we do what we got to do now, than you postpone it for 5 years from now. And that's where I want to end. We have to do it now. That is what we owe to ourselves, future generations, and we owe it to Guyana. It is the African spirit and resistance, I'm convinced, which will save Guyana.
The African spirit that will save our country from going under, given all that has happened in the decades since independence, but particularly over the last 2.5 to 3 years. Sisters and brothers, thank you all very much. Brother Ogunseye, thank you so much for coming on to Black Matters tonight. Next week, Friday, we are going to be talking about the 100th anniversary of the 1823 rebellion. Among other things, I'm going to have a set of folks on next week for us to deal with that anniversary. And we're going to have some other issues next week, Friday. So be sure to join us next week, beginning on Monday. New edition of Politics 101 on Monday, and then we go through. We have an excellent lineup of candidates who are going to be coming on our programs next week. So enjoy your weekend, those of you who are into football. Enjoy your Super Bowl. But I always say at the end of the week, do something political. Do something political. Contribute to some one of the shows. Go out and volunteer for something. You know, try to convince another person to come onto our programs and to swell our numbers as we witness for freedom. Have a wonderful weekend. And as Brother Ogunseye said, we have defeated them before, and we are going to defeat them again. We are going to defeat them again.
If you hear that, black is beautiful. Santa Claus. Black is beautiful. It's a textile. Lift your head like me. You got